So let's begin an initiation. All right, again, initiation means beginning. We're going to look at some different schools of occultism, different occult sciences. I call them the many paths or the many ways, the many methods to the same place, to the same destination. So this section constitutes kind of an occult initiation, about the very basic generalized concepts of some of these occult traditions. Again, time is not going to allow me to go into great depths or details, nor is this presentation intended to be a very in-depth introductory work. It's intended to be rudimentary for people who are just learning about this information for the first time. Occult traditions, many paths, one destination. I'll just say at the beginning of this section, and I'll kind of highlight this as we go through these traditions. Ultimately, all of the esoteric traditions were designed specifically to do one thing, and that was to convey a working knowledge of natural law to the initiates of that tradition, which means a working knowledge of how the universe actually creates through the interaction with our free will decisions, with our free will decision-making processes. We are co-creating with the laws of the universe the experience that we are having, that is being generated for us, okay, as a result of those laws operating in conjunction with our free will. That's what the occult has always tried to teach people. See that one slide, you know, with the building blocks on top of each other, the trivium process resulting in what manifests in our world? That's ultimately the occult. That is the occult traditions. They were trying to teach people how the laws of nature work in conjunction with the decision-making processes of the individuals of a society. So let's look at a few of these traditions. Probably the oldest occult tradition on earth is shamanism. And some people don't look at it as an occult tradition. I personally do. And shamanism, like the occult in general, isn't one thing. You can get down into, you know, subsections, subgroupings of shamanistic practices. You know, different practices are practiced in different regions of the world, in different cultural regions, different geographic regions. In general, I feel that shamanism grew out of very, very, very ancient knowledge, which was brought here from another place, ultimately. And this connects with my work in cosmic abandonment and the information I've been going through on my radio show recently. But I think the earliest shamans were working with high-level, ancient knowledge, and they were working with knowledge of spiritual realms and different levels of consciousness that are out of the ordinary, out of the realm of what we would consider ordinary levels of experience or consciousness. It's a very internal work, but then the true shaman brings the internal work that they've done within themselves back out into the seeming external domain and applies it in their society. So as such, a shaman is a way shower. What shamanism actually is an ancient tradition of knowledge comprising practices that involve a practitioner reaching altered states of consciousness via diverse techniques. Some of these techniques can include music, dancing, endurance practices, endurance scenarios, extremes of temperature, or ingestion of hallucinogenic compounds, and many other techniques as well, in order to encounter and interact directly with intelligences existing in purely spiritual domains. The word shaman itself means one who sees in the dark. As a word, that's what it means. So while darkness is present all around, the shaman can still see in the darkness. He has night vision, in other words. And he's employing that for the benefit of the people around him who have difficulty seeing in that darkness. Again, as such, shamans were considered way showers of their people. those who are capable of showing the people of their society the way out of darkness and chaos and into the light of knowledge. Shamans were those who had attained understanding of both the forces dwelling within the human psyche, which was the bulk of their work. The bulk of their practices dealt with those techniques to work with the psyche, particularly the very deeply nested and dark material of the human subconscious. But they also worked with the forces that are inherent in nature, what I call natural law. And they used that knowledge for the benefit, for the healing, and for the uplift of their respective communities. That's the best definition that I could think of for explaining exactly what the set of practices that comprise shamanism is. Again, it is a diversified set of practices. It is not one thing. Shamans often employ hallucinogenic compounds, which have been called many different names in different cultures and throughout different times in history. I just want to go through some of the names and break down some of the words because, as we're going to get into symbolism later, words are very symbolic in many cases, and the subsections of the words that are used to comprise them coming from different ancient languages, when we break them down etymologically and look at the etymology of the word, it tells us so much about the intended meaning of the word. So some of these hallucinogenic compounds that shamans have used over the centuries, the natural ones, some neo-shamans use these new designer hallucinogenic compounds, which I won't be getting into, but the three traditional ones that have been used in a widespread way all over the earth are cannabis in its different forms as sativa or indica, different variations of hallucinogenic mushrooms that grow in every continent of the world, and the ayahuasca vine, or some of the different analogs of ayahuasca prepared often in South America and Central America. So ayahuasca is one of the key, active ingredients actually in ayahuasca is dimethyltryptamine. That's not pictured here. This is the actual MAO inhibitor that works with dimethyltryptamine to make it orally active, to comprise an ayahuasca analog on the right-hand side here. That's Mimosa hostilis root bark, used by many shamans to create ayahuasca by adding a plant material that contains DMT to that and cooking it down. DMT is another entheogenic or psychedelic compound that shamans have often used, or derivatives of that, or very similar compounds to that, like bufotenine. But to just go back to the etymology of the word, entheogen is a more modern way of looking at hallucinogens or psychedelics. It comes from the Greek and Latin. The Greek prefix "en" means within, the first part of the word. Then in the middle of the word we have theo. That comes from the Greek noun theos, which means God or divinity. And then the last part, gens, in entheogen, comes from the Latin verb generare, which means to create. So we put these three root words together, and entheogen means to create or generate the divine within. It doesn't mean to become God. It means to work with and grow the spark of the divine within the individual by communing with this force that is capable of opening up an other dimensional experience within us. So you're seeing a divine realm or an otherworldly realm within the mind's eye when you commune with these compounds or helper spirits. They've been called psychedelics. It's a much more popular word for them. That comes from the Greek noun psyche, meaning mind, and the Greek verb delun, which means to make visible or to reveal by removing a source of obscuration. Now, what have I just said there? To make visible or to reveal by removing a source of obscuration is to do what? To de-occult. Literally, the word psychedelic means to de-occult. And again, I don't advocate for the irresponsible use of any of these compounds. I feel that they have a specific purpose that they can be used for to uplift human consciousness if they are worked with in a respectful way. So psychedelic literally means to reveal the mind or to de-occult aspects of the mind. These were the true sacraments of the ancient world, employed by early human beings. The word sacrament comes from the Latin adjective sacrum, which means sacred or holy, and the Latin noun mens mentis, which means mind, where we get the English word mental from. Again, a sacrament is something that is capable of helping us to foster a holy mind or a sacred mindset. That's why the sacraments of the ancient world were active ones. They were active compounds that were given to the congregation or the initiates of the shamanic tradition. Now, in today's religion, it has become an esoteric religion, a fragmentary memory of true shamanism of the past, of the ancient world, and we now have inert sacraments that are often given to religious congregations, which don't actually provide any different or mind-altering state of consciousness. Sacraments or psychedelics or entheogens have also been referred to as communion. This is a religious term, of course, in the Christian tradition. It comes from the Latin preposition com, which means together, and the Latin verb munere, which means to build or to strengthen or to fortify or to protect. So when we look at the word tradition, etymologically, it actually means to build together. And that's what communion within a community will help you to do. It'll help you to build strength together and to come into a state of protection by understanding morality and natural law. And finally, these compounds were simply referred to, probably the best word you could refer to them as, medicines, because they're true medicines, especially cannabis. And that's something people really need to do their homework about and then spread that information to a lot of other people. Cannabis is one of the most potent medicines, particularly just about for curing any chronic ailment, but particularly for healing cancer of all kinds. And this is something that has been occulted from most people's view because pharmaceutical cartels, they want to clean up and keep people dependent on their drugs loaded with harmful effects and side effects for the duration of their natural lives. A real medicine, the word medicine comes from the Latin noun medi, which means the middle, the center, or the balance point, and the Latin noun sinus or kinus, which means ruin, destruction, or chaos. So when we put these together, what a medicine does is it brings balance to ruin. It brings balance to that which once was in ruin. Is that not what a true medicine is supposed to help us to achieve? To re-achieve a state of balance. In other words, to bring order to that which was in chaos. And ultimately, what the shaman really worked with was knowledge. Okay, that's the most important thing that can bring balance back to a society that is in ruins, or to bring order back to a society which was in chaos. Knowledge was the ultimate medicine of a shamanic culture. Which brings me to the point, and this is going to be a pretty controversial point of view that I'm going to lay out here. But if you actually look into this point, you will understand that this is the case. And many people will not advocate for this position, and I will. This is something I make no bones about advocating for. A shamanic culture was very controlling of their young. And I don't even want to use the word control. It was very strictly guiding of their young. Let's use that expression, okay? Control takes a very negative connotation because control is often for a manipulative purpose designed to bring about the desire of the person who's doing the manipulation, okay, their own selfish will. Shamanic education is something that I think people need to more deeply understand about what it was and how it was done. I talked about this a little bit at the end of my last seminar, and started to talk about it at the end of the last time I was in Connecticut last year in the question and answer session. Many shamanic cultures throughout time have employed a strict system of moral education, the teaching of natural law principles for their young. In such an educational system, it is deemed unacceptable for their young not to learn the objective difference between right and wrong behavior at an early age. Again, this is something that's not even taught in our society. In any schools in the world, anywhere in the world, are teachers really teaching the difference, the true difference between right and wrong behavior? Are we teaching morality to our children? How many parents are even doing it, let alone teachers in schools? We're sending them off to a state-run educational system that wants to teach them compliance, obedience, and make them malleable so that their minds are easily molded to whatever the state wants them to be. That's why it's called outcome-based education. Well, shamanic education can be looked at as a different form of outcome-based education because the ringer or the gauntlet that the shamanic culture was putting their children through was, you're gonna come out the other end a moral human being, or you're not gonna live in this culture. We're gonna put you out into the wilderness as a result, which equals death in those societies, especially the ancient versions of them. You know, in the modern world, these practices are largely dying due to there not really being any shamanic cultures practically left, and the rapid influx of modern civilization and technology and cities, etc. We're wiping out these old shamanic cultures, the very few that are still left in very remote regions, pretty much only in South America and Africa, and certain isolated places in Asia. So the small percentage of those children who proved unable or unwilling to learn such moral sensibilities during their childhood may have often been ostracized from the shamanic culture upon reaching adulthood. They were recognized as the primarily psychopathic beings within that culture, and the shamanic culture would not tolerate their presence. They would just take them to the edge of the village, say, don't come back here. If you come back, it will be considered an act of aggression, you'll be dealt with. So the forest will deal with you. And that's it. And you're on your own, and if you can survive there, that's fine. But if not, don't bring your immoral presence back into our culture. And I advocate for this methodology. So such child rearing methods, and again, this is because, I'm not saying you want to be a total domineering parent over your child. What I'm saying is, a child is literally like a blank hard drive, literally. And it's a hard thing for people to swallow. They don't want to accept. We come in with some inherent capabilities into this reality. But largely, what we become in our adult years is the product of what goes into the individual during their childhood developmental years. And this is something that is highly unpopular for most people to hear, and they'll fight with it to their bitter death, not for it to be that way, because they don't want the responsibility of having to program the young properly, to put the software into that hard drive, to lay down the operating system, to lay down the format, to lay down the operating system, and to lay down the good software without bugs into that mind. They don't want that. They think it's just magically going to work itself out, or they can turn the child over to the state, or God forbid, even worse, the television, and magically they'll grow up fine. Well, it doesn't work that way, folks. And that's part of the problem of this whole society, is we largely have a society of abandoned children running around this planet that didn't have a moral upbringing by their parents. I know I didn't. That's what led me into the dark occult. I was an ignorant child, thinking I knew what was really going on in this world. And that's what pushed me right into the arms of Satanism. Because I didn't receive a moral upbringing at all. Everybody can say to an extent, our parents tried to get us to be good people. It's not good enough. Doesn't cut it. Sorry to burst your bubble. Get as offended as you want. If parents can't definitively teach objective knowledge of what is right and what is wrong to their young, there is absolutely no possibility of that child truly growing up as a true moral being. I didn't receive that information, that knowledge from my parents, my grandparents, or anybody else in my family. I received it from strangers who cared enough to either talk about that knowledge, record it in video presentations, record it in audio presentations, or write it down in books. And that's who raised me. Strangers raised me. No one in my family. And that's largely the case in most people's family. Those who do have family members who truly raise them are blessed individuals. And be thankful for those individuals in your life. What the shamanic culture, just to wrap up this slide, such child rearing methods are one of the many reasons that shamanic cultures often display extremely low incidences of crime and mental illness compared with other cultures. They knew a simple principle. If garbage goes into a complex system like a computer, inevitably, invariably, garbage comes out of it. If you program a computer with a bad file system format, a bad operating system, bad software, you're not getting good output on the screen, on the printer, on the internet, or anywhere else the information goes out to. Not possible. You put good quality information and coding into that computer, you're going to get quality out of it. And that is largely how a human being works. I'm not saying we are computers. I always make that caveat because there's always people who say, he's getting up here and saying we're all computers. Not what I'm saying. I'm saying our fundamental thought and behavioral processes largely work like a computer, that if you put good information in to be taken in, understood, and then acted upon, then you're going to have good output through behavior. If you have bad information that you've fed that to, and that goes for bad food that you're putting into the body, bad information that you're programming in through media and through the school system, etc., you can only get garbage output on the screen of life called human behavior. And this has to be deeply understood because we're not truly educating our young at all, certainly not in a moral sense. That's shamanism in general, in a nutshell. Again, I'm only going to cursorily touch on these. That's all time allows for. The Comitian tradition. Okay, this is the ancient Egyptian system of moral teachings. The ancient Egyptian system of occult practices and beliefs. The Comitian people were from Egypt, which was then called Kemet, or Kem, simply Kem. You could say it was Kemet, KMT is how it's transliterated into English. Kem or Kemet means the black land. The word black in Egyptian is Kem. So the original name for Egypt was Kemet. There it is in Egyptian hieroglyphs. Kemet is derived from the word Kem, again, a shortening of Kemet. And the word Kem means black or dark in ancient Egyptian. The term may have referred to the darkness of the soil of ancient Egypt caused by the mineral deposits left by the yearly overflow of the Nile River in the Nile Valley. The English word Egypt is derived from the Greek Aegyptos, which means, that was the Greek word for the ancient capital city of Egypt named Memphis. And that in turn, Aegyptos, which meant Memphis in Greek, the original name in Comitian or in ancient Egyptian for the city of Memphis was called Hut-Ka-Ptah by the ancient Comitians themselves. Hut-Ka-Ptah means the temple of the spirit of Ptah. Ptah is one of the highest creator gods in the Egyptian pantheon of gods and goddesses. He was considered a very important creator god. He was actually considered the first and greatest of the alchemists, those from Kem, the teachers from Kem, where the word alchemist and alchemy comes from. So Ptah was considered one of the original master teachers. He is often equivalated with Thoth, with Hermes Trismegistus, in different occult traditions. Today, the word that modern Egyptians use for the nation of Egypt is Misr, which is derived from the Hebrew name for Egypt, Mizraim. Mizraim in Hebrew means a narrow place or narrow straits, probably referring to certain areas of the Nile River. But I would suggest that synchromystically, if for no other reason, this name, narrow straits, ultimately refers to the moral teachings of ancient Chem and the Chemician tradition, because they did teach a strict set of principles regarding natural or moral law. I'll get to that in a moment. I just want to look at some of their symbolism in the example of the Chemician Trinity. Just like Christianity, which derived its trinity from the ancient Chemician culture, the Chemicians had a trinity of gods and goddesses, 2 gods and a goddess, to be exact. This was Osiris, Isis, and Horus. Osiris, depicted there in the middle with, atop the pillar, was the creator god of this trinity. He was the Father, God the Father, in other words. But what he symbolically represented in this allegorical symbolism of this trinity was the creative essence of the human being, which is the thought process, the mind. The thing that ultimately has to go to work first for anything to get created. Anything we want to create or put into manifestation has to ultimately work through the mental realm first. You want to build a computer, you want to build a podium, you want to build a home, you know, any piece of technology, it has to exist first in the realm of mind. It has to be thought about archetypally, the need for it, you know, its purpose. Then you have to go through the process of what you're going to do to make that happen and come into manifestation. All mental processes. So creation follows the mind, hence the mind, the thoughts, that's the Father figure, the creator God. And that's what Osiris represented. Isis was the goddess figure in this trinity, depicted on the right. She was the divine mother, or in other words, the emotional aspects of the being, the spirit in which we do something, our spiritual essence, the sacred feminine essence. And then when those two things come together, our cares, our desires, our spirit, combined with our mental faculties of the mind, then what happens? We act in the world, and something is generated as a result. And this was Horus. He was the male child because he represented action, the masculine principle. And he was considered the savior figure, the one that was ultimately born to redeem the world through right action. Now, right action is what's ultimately going to redeem the world. And you can only take right action if you have right knowledge about the difference between right and wrong behavior. So he represented right action, that which we do with our body. It's a sacred masculine force. Very powerful if we understand the Trinity as such, that it is just different aspects of our own consciousness, thought, emotion, and action. Again, here's more Chemician allegorical symbolism through their statues. You see the god Osiris, the creator god, in the middle, and this is representative of the mind, specifically the brain physiology. You have the left brain set on Osiris's left-hand side. Whoever made this graphic, I didn't make the colors in the background, I just found this graphic like this. The person probably already had a very good understanding that this represented the brain, because they actually depicted the frequencies that often represent the left and right brain. Red usually represents the left brain tendencies or capabilities, and blue is usually symbolic of the right brain, the intuitive and creative capacities. So if you put yourself as Osiris in this image on this statue, set the dark god of the dualistic light, the dualistic sun aspect, okay? He was the dark sun. He was the setting sun. That's why his name is Set. The word sunset comes from Set. Okay, so Horus was the rising sun, the solar disk that was coming up into power on the eastern horizon. And as such, he represents the positive aspects of light, or the nurturing aspects of light. Okay, light coming into our presence and operating through the creative mind, operating through the right mind, through the compassionate and nurturing qualities, the sacred feminine, in other words. And Set kind of represents in this image logic and the left brain mental capacities without the balance of that sacred feminine force of truth and upright action that Horus represented. As such, Set was always a mischievous character in the Egyptian pantheon and the Egyptian stories, their allegorical stories. And he fought against Horus and ultimately conquers him and banishes him into the underworld where they have to do battle. And Horus has to use his willpower to conquer Set and then rise again on the eastern horizon to rejuvenate the world through light and right action. It's an allegory about knowledge and how knowledge can be used for good or ill. And if you use just pure intellect without the balance of the right brain, morality and compassion, then you're going toward a dark path. The Egyptians had no word for death, but in the Cometian tradition, during the direction that the setting sun was setting over the western horizon, they called, if you had passed on into the next realm, they called it westing. Moving to the west was their term for death. That's it. And again, that's the opposite direction of the rising sun. It's going into a place of darkness and a place of the unknown. And we'll look at that when we look at Freemasonic symbolism a little bit later. Another aspect of the Cometian tradition was the goddess Ma'at, perhaps one of the most powerful allegorical representations was Ma'at. There was no higher god or goddess than Ma'at because she represented natural law itself. She was the law. Okay, so the goddess Ma'at represented truth, law, and justice among the Cometian people. The purpose of coming into harmony with the teachings of Ma'at, this mother goddess figure, was to learn how to avoid self-inflicted chaos by learning the laws of morality, and thus not generating chaos for yourself by choosing wrong action. And the society would thus not generate social chaos by choosing wrong action in the aggregate. As a whole culture, they would definitively, objectively know the difference between right and wrong behavior as a whole, and therefore they would embrace Ma'at and not go into a state of self-inflicted chaos. The Cometians taught what is known as the negative confessions of Ma'at. I call these apophatic confessions, coming from the Greek term apophasis, which means to say that which something is not. To say that which something definitively is not and has nothing to do with and is nothing like. That's the process of apophasis. You're going to say, well, if I want to describe right action, what do I want to really convey about it? I want to say it is the opposite of action that is employed toward a harmful end. It does not create harm to another being when I take that action. That's an apophatic definition of what a right is. Okay? So there was a whole laundry list of apophatic confessions, or in other words, things that you had to say in the afterlife realm to this goddess when you went into the realm of judgment upon dying, that you did not do. She didn't want to know what your works were. She wanted to know what your works were not. So she wanted to look at, here's all the harmful things you could do in a life. I won't read them all. It's a whole, huge, again, list of things. But she wanted to know, did you not engage in these things? And if you did not engage in these things, then I can say you truly were a good being. You truly understood the difference between right and wrong because you didn't do any of these wrong behaviors. Okay, this is what people want to make constant justifications for, and say, oh, we don't need to know the real definitive difference between right and wrong. We could just listen to somebody else or, do what they're telling us to do and take it on faith. To really know natural law is to know what actions we do not have a right to do because taking them is harming another being or their property, their rightful property. So what I would say in my analysis of Comitian philosophy, particularly when it came to their apophatic sense of morality, is this was the real narrow straits that we're talking about. You know, it was a very narrow pathway that they defined morality to be. And in the story, in the allegorical story of the afterlife, when you went into the hall or chamber of Ma'at, the god Anubis would take the initiate or the dead being's heart, and they would weigh it on Ma'at's scale. And this represented, did they have a light heart? Did they truly understand the difference between right and wrong? Did they try to live that way all the time? Did they not make excuses and justifications? And she would put this feather depicted in her headband there, a blue feather on the other end of the scale. And if the heart outweighed the feather, that meant that the person really did not have a true understanding of morality, and their soul would kind of be recycled and have to go back and learn more spiritual lessons in another life. And if it did weigh either the same or, not outweigh the feather, then the allegorical story was that the being had become a being of light through their knowledge of the difference between right and wrong. And allegorically, the Comitians taught that then that being would be able to go to a different star system or actually become a star and shine their light to other civilizations. A very beautiful symbolic allegory dealing with morality, specifically an apophatic variant of moral teachings. One other piece of symbolism that I used as the cover image for this seminar was the Great Sphinx of Egypt, who I call the guardian of the mysteries, and many other occultists have referred to as the guardian of the mysteries. Again, some people think that this was originally the image of the original alchemist Ptah, possibly having changed over the years, the visage possibly being weathered away by different natural forces, particularly water. A lot of revisionist Egyptologists and revisionist historians have clearly demonstrated that there were deluges and floodwaters in that part of the world over 10,000 years ago, 11,000 years ago, and the Sphinx's weathering is clearly water-derived. But it looks like the face has been redone on the Sphinx to represent a modern zodiacal reference of Leo combined with Virgo, the feminine visage of this great Sphinx. Also, you could look at that as representing the feminine aspect of natural law. So really what we're looking at here is a zodiac in stone representing the rising of the sun during the spring equinox at approximately 12,000 or so years ago.